Analytics professor would be proud of me. But anyway, 3 parts. First of all, the first part of this tool, letter A, remember God knows. Remember, God knows. What did Nehemiah say in verse 4? He said, "Oh, hear, O God, hear, O our God, how we are despised." Now, this was not Nehemiah trying to tell God something. It is simply reminding us that God already knows. And here's the point, and you can write this underneath if you want. Not one negative event defines us. Hear me on that one, friends. We are not defined by the negative events in our lives. Negatives are a given. And God knows that. If God defined us by our negatives, we'd all die. But what does God define us by? When you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart God has raised Him from the dead, you are what? Saved from the negatives. God knows. He defines you by that decision. We want to define ourselves by our negatives. God never does that. Second part of this tool is remember who God is. Later on in this 4th chapter, Nehemiah says to his people, "Remember the Lord who is great and awesome." Someone has written, God is bigger than any problem I have or may ever have. God is bigger than any problem I have or may ever have. You see, discouragement is no match for a correct understanding of who God is. And the third part of this tool is to remember that God will act. Once more in chapter 4, in verse 20, Nehemiah writes, and he is talking about this to his people. He says, "Our God will act for us." Our God will act for us. Friends, God is the ultimate warrior. If you want to beat discouragement, let Him fight your battles. Because when He fights the battles, guess what? He always wins. Let Him fight the battle in your life. Let Him fight the discouragement in your life, because He will beat it. You can rely on it. So here's the key concept. When we remember the right things, we can get a handle on discouragement. Here's the second tool. The second tool is to reorganize in the right areas. One of the effects of discouragement is that it sidetracks us. And you all know me, I like railroad analogies. And getting on a sidetrack is a way of going nowhere. Sidetracks do one thing. They get us off the main line. I have a motto hanging in my little office at home, and here's what it says. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Isn't that what it is? Discouragement, the effect of discouragement is to sidetrack us so we get off the main line. What we tend to do is rearrange instead of reorganize. It's kind of like, shuffling the chairs on the deck of the Titanic. Because no matter how you shuffle them, it's going to sink. God doesn't want us to do that. He wants us to reorganize, and He wants us to reorganize in a very specific way. And this is a tool that has 3 parts. And the first part is very simple. The first part is set a goal. Goals are powerful tools. Somebody wrote some time ago this line, which I always like. It says, "I believe in the 10-engine supersonic means of getting from here to nowhere." It's kind of like the atheist who prayed, his last prayer was, "God, if there is a God, have mercy on my soul if I have one." We need goals. Goals motivate us. They empower us to do things we would not ordinarily accomplish. And in Nehemiah's experience, the goal for him and his people was to rebuild the wall. For what purpose? So they would no longer be in disgrace. That was the most powerful goal, vision he could enunciate, he could give to those people. And that's why here on New Horizons every Sunday morning, when we begin our worship, what do? We say together what the vision of New Horizons is. To connect and reconnect people to Jesus. The second thing to do here, the second part of this tool is to then set priorities. We have to set priorities, and that means we simply need to determine what the most important things are to do now. And in Nehemiah's situation, they thought they had that fixed, by the way. We've talked to them this past week, but obviously it's not. In Nehemiah's situation, by the way, it's going to go off again at least once, okay? So those of you who are not used to it, just want you to know it's going to happen again. All right. Now watch me be wrong about that one. In Nehemiah's situation, the priority was to protect the builders from their hostile neighbors. In our situations, I think setting priorities sometimes is quite difficult for us because we think we don't know what the most important thing is to do. The fact is that when we pray, when we open ourselves to God, when we let Him lead us, we do know what the most important things are to do. I just so like the first piece we started with this morning. My life is in you. What I know about it is that when I praise God and my life is in Him, He enables me to understand what the priorities are and what needs to be done now. And I can get to it. Okay, third part of this is then to set strategies. Once we have the goal and define the priorities, we need to determine what we must do, and that's the strategies. What did Nehemiah do? Well, his strategy was very simple. What he did was he had everybody that was building around the wall. He was in such a position where he could watch everybody that was building around the wall, and he had a trumpet guy with him. And if somebody on the wall was attacked, they blew the trumpet, and everybody went to that site to defend that part of the wall. That was his strategy, and it worked. Our strategy needs to be improved, I think, because one of the things that I discovered about myself and my whole idea of trying to deal with discouragement was I wanted to tough this out. I wanted to make it on my own. I wanted to be able to say, I beat this myself. I wanted to be the Lone Ranger about it all. It's not a good strategy. Trying to tough it out, trying to deal with discouragement alone is not a good strategy. We need help. I needed help. And we need help from God, and we need help from the community of faith. That's one of the purposes of New Horizons, is to provide that help. And all of us here have the opportunity and have within our experience the ability to help everybody else. So here's the key concept. When we reorganize the right areas, we can get a handle on discouragement. And I just want to play it again. Reorganize is far different than rearrange. They are not synonyms. Third tool. Commit to the right principles. Here's probably where I would be, I'd have a little red marginal note from my homiletics professor because this isn't an R. See, the first two were R's, remember, and all that, whatever it does, but this isn't an R. I just couldn't get that to work. I don't know, the thesaurus didn't have an R word that went along with commit. So this is commit to the right principles. Here's the point. Discouragement neuters commitment. I want you to get that. Discouragement neuters commitment. When we're discouraged, we do not want to commit to anything or anybody, and we tend to wallow in our self-pity and think that somehow or another nobody knows the trouble we know. The error of that is that Jesus knows it all. In fact, the Bible tells us that Jesus experienced everything we have experienced, are experiencing. He was, what does it say? Tempted in every way that we are. But then there's that little line that says after, and yet without sin, which is what none of us can claim. Jesus was committed to the right principles, and we need to commit to the right principles, because if we don't, there will be no commitment in our lives whatsoever. Will not be hot, will not be cold. Thanks for not making a dishonest person out of me. Anyway, we just won't do anything. And if you want to read what God thinks about people who are moderates and lukewarm people, go into Revelation. You can find out what he thinks about lukewarm people. Not good. Okay, this tool has 3 points, 3 parts. And first of all, we need to commit to making the sacrifice. In verse 14 of chapter 4, Nehemiah challenged the people. He challenged them to put it all on the line. He said, fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, your houses. Fight for it all. The movie Courageous was referenced here earlier on. I've not seen that, but I've seen Fireproof, and I've seen Facing the Giants, which both come from the same production company. Do you remember that coach's line in Facing the Giants, which he was constantly throwing at his team? Remember it? Leave it all on the field. Leave it all on the field. We don't want to do that. We don't want to make that commitment. But I'll tell you what, we can't get a handle on discouragement unless we're committed to sacrifice at that level. We just simply can't do it. We can't. God won't give us the ability to make to beat discouragement unless we're willing to commit to sacrifice. That means to sacrifice me, myself. This is what Jesus said. If anyone would come after me, let him what? Deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. That's a principle. That's not self-denial. That's denying myself. That's putting Jesus in the place of myself. And what that means then is that my discouragement begins to leave because, first of all, I have His best interest at heart, and second of all, I have the best interest at heart of the people around me that I love the most. And that starts with my spouse. And when I begin to understand that sacrifice level, things change. That's a principle. The second one here is commit to making the effort. Now, obviously, without sacrifice, there is no effort. And without effort, there's no sacrifice. And the people with Nehemiah, they understood that. They had a whatever it takes attitude. That's the effort we're talking about. Whatever it takes. I used to pray to God, God, I want you to use me. Oh, I was intense about that. God, I want you to use me. And here's how I want you to do it. And you know what God said? Don't think so. And He let me figure it out for myself. And I did. And what I figured out was God didn't want people who wanted to be used by Him. What God was looking for was useful people. Because when I'm useful to God, when I'm willing to make the effort to be useful to God, then He can do what He wants to in my life, which is what He wants me to do. And when I'm useful to Him and He's doing what He wants to through me, guess who takes responsibility for the behavior? He does. But when I want Him to use me and I want to do what I want to do so He can use me, and it doesn't go right, then I take the responsibility for it. I want God to get the glory from it. I want my life to glorify Him. I want my life to edify you all. Anybody else I come in contact with.